Let's bring Paul Rieckhoff in on this, host of the Independent Americans podcast and founder of American Veterans for Ukraine. So in this country, we don't like the idea or the scene of Russian ships gathering, near Cuba, given our history. So what do you make of this?
Yeah, it can feel like Cuban Missile Crisis Part 2.
Let's hope not.
I mean, I think we have to recognize that the Russians do, whether they view it as a threat or not, have ships 90 miles from Florida's border. And the situation in the world has changed. And Ukraine has changed the entire dynamic for the West and the East. And now Russia is solidifying their relationships, not just with Cuba, but also with Venezuela to our south, who's no American ally. They've got deep ties with China, who's all in on Ukraine, and North Korea and others. So what's shaping up is the new axis of evils. And Cuba is always going to be a part of that. Venezuela is always going to be a part of that. And frankly speaking, it's all a threat to the United States, especially in this dynamic environment.
A couple of things while we're talking about it. We'll show the ships in question. I think we have a list of them. And we also, after that, we can put a map up because that's, I think people know this in general. This is what we're talking about with Russia. But the proximity, obviously, is the threat. Between Havana, Cuba, and say, Miami, Florida, and that kind of thing. But this, to you, is all about Ukraine, you think, what's going on here?
Absolutely. And Putin has said that all bets are off and everything is in place. So that's the other factor that's changed here. It's not 10 years ago. Yes, Russian ships make routine stops to Cuba, but Ukraine wasn't happening. Putin wasn't threatening to use nukes. They've got a nuke sub there. The entire landscape around the world is more volatile. Some view the American military as more vulnerable because we're engaged in other places. We're also preoccupied with the Middle East and our own borders. So if you're the enemy, you're going to try to push and prod in whatever way you can and try to provoke and try to at least elicit a response. And this is also the psychological game that Putin is playing with the world and with his allies to try to corner the United States and to try to press his advantage.
Anything Biden does at G7, we're going to talk about this in a few minutes in more detail, that maybe can counter this and, make a deal with Zelensky, or where are we on Ukraine right now?
I think he's got to continue to do what he did last week at D-Day, which is show there's allies of the world that will stand together in defense of freedom. This is much bigger than Biden. This is about showing America's strength and about our hundreds of years of relationships with NATO allies, the UK, France, and others, in saying that if you do cross lines, if you attack Poland, if you attack a NATO ally, that there is a formidable response that you will face. So it's up to Biden to keep that hold, keep that group tight, and show that it stands strongly against Russia, against China, against North Korea, and against other adversaries.
All right, Paul, if you stand by, I think our next story you'll want to comment on as well, certainly within your area of expertise as we talk about foreign threats. The